Welcome to DeFi Drip, the series where we talk about all things coffee and changing the world of finance. My name is Cassidy, and today we're joined by Facu Peláez, Manager of Business Development at Karpatkey. Today we're going to talk about how Karpatkey supports DAOs on their treasury management, their opinions about best practices for portfolio allocation, and take a look ahead at how they think this ecosystem will evolve. Welcome to the show, Facundo, or can I call you Facu?
Yes, you can. Thank you.
Awesome.
Nice to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Well, first things first, what is your relationship to coffee? Do you drink it?
It's very funny you ask. I'm a coffee nerd. Right now I'm drinking a decaf espresso because I generally don't drink coffee after 5 p.m. more or less. But I follow the AeroPress World Championships. I follow the recipes. I have my setup here, my grinder, the ritual, to unplug a little bit a couple times a day. And I have this notebook where I dial in each type of coffee beans that I buy. So for each coffee bean, I do iterations until I find the cup that I like, with different grind sizes, water temperature, water to coffee ratio. And right now I have a bag of coffee from Guatemala that I'm about to finish.
Wow, that's awesome. Right now, I have a bag of coffee from Kenya, and I'm finding Kenyan beans are my personal favorite at the moment. But
Great.
I have to say, you're probably the biggest coffee nerd we've had so far on DeFi Trip.
Yeah, once I went like too far and I bought this sifter. So, with 12 sleeves, so I could sift the grinds until I got the exact grind size that I wanted. But that was like an overkill because it took like 10 minutes to make a cup, so it didn't make sense. Uh, but for Kenyan coffee, I do greater water ratios, like 220 ml for 15 grams of coffee. Let it steep for a couple minutes, and they're amazing.
Wow, good advice. I'm gonna try that.
Yeah.
Well, I guess, yeah, so let's dive into it. I'd love if you could take a moment and give us an introduction of yourself and share a little bit more about Karpatki.
Sure. So I've done many different things before Web3. I studied business administration, then a master in international relations that had nothing to do with it, and worked in different companies. But what I liked most was working on automations and project management and the commercial part of businesses. I did work at different commercial areas, and worked for several years as a consultant with HR systems. And I was working like as a hobby, not working, but my hobby was DeFi investment. When Bitcoin, when the white paper came out, I found this to be really interesting, and I started reading as a hobby, in my free time. Um, and then I was contacted by Marce, Karpatki's co-founder. We have known each other for several years, and he told me that he was starting at Karpatki. This was a startup, a spin-off from Gnosis, and offered me to join. And I thought it was a great idea because I would do it professionally. What I was doing with my own investments, I could do it instead of doing it for a hobby. I could do it for a living. So that's how I arrived here at Karpatki. And what we basically do is we help organizations manage their treasuries so they can forget about their finances, they can focus on their core business. In general, DAOs are not very fond of finance. And also, to do it properly, you need to have a decent risk management team. So this team has grown in size and in complexity, and they work jointly with their strategy team. They put together investment strategies that then another team has to execute non-custodially. To do that, we use Safe, the multi-signature wallet, together with the Zodiac rules modifier, and that allows us to operate without trusted signers. So we just post a strategy into the governance of the DAO or the organization, and once it's approved, it's hard coded into the Zodiac rules modifier, and that allows us to be able to do transactions within those boundaries to apply strategies and not have a person from the other organization approving every single transaction. And then we basically start from scratch every day. We have to monitor all the positions to make sure they're still a good alternative for the investment strategy and for the risk appetite of the organization we're working with. And we have a tech team that takes care of developing the framework behind the reporting and the automations. And basically, the difference between karpatkey and other solutions to handle treasuries is that we have an active approach, and we can act quickly instead of a sudden market downturn, and we can secure all positions and prevent liquidations or capital loss, because one of the tasks of the risk management team is to constantly draft and maintain these emergency protocols that in different contingencies allows us to follow certain steps to de-risk all the positions. Because when that type of events take place, you need to have a structured answer, because they are always unexpected, so you need to be ready beforehand. So I don't know if that answered the question or if I drifted away.
No, I think that gives a lot of context on your work with karpatkey. I'd love to hear a little bit more about, it sounds like a lot of this work that you're doing is on chain, and a lot of it is managed in a permissionless way and voted on first by the DAO through governance. And so I'd love if you could walk us through one of these relationships, maybe with Gnosis and the GnosisDAO in a little bit more detail to understand that.
Sure. So regarding the on-chain work, everything we do is on-chain, and we only operate within DeFi. We do not use any centralized finance platforms, nor any other platforms which aren't in decentralized finance. And the way in which we operate in a non-custodial way is by having by using the safe multi-signature wallet together with the Zodiac rules modifier. So the way in which this works is we first post a strategy, an investment strategy that is as vague as possible in the governance of the DAOs we work with, or we send it to the organizations we work with if they are not DAOs. And after they approve this strategy, it's hard-coded into the Zodiac rules modifier. And what that does is we have another safe wallet that interacts with the main wallet that is under the control of the DAO or the organization that holds the treasury. And the transactions we make, each and every transaction we make, is monitored by the rules modifier. If it's within the boundaries that were previously approved by the organization, then the transaction is approved. If not, it's rejected. So for example, we cannot transfer to an EOA, or we cannot use pools or protocols or amounts which were not allowed listed first by the organization. So they can rest assured that we are only going to operate within the boundaries they voted on and approved, and we have the liberty to work in an active way, following the market almost in real time, and being more agile than other solutions that are based in vaults, for example. And regarding our relationship with Gnosis, Marcelo, our co-founder, he started working at Gnosis before it became a DAO. So he was taking care of the investment strategy. And after it turned into a DAO, the job became more complex. So he associated with Alejandro, our other co-founder. And karpatkey was born, and it became a Gnosis spin-off. And I think becoming independent from Gnosis was a sensible move, because that gives you that eliminates certain bias that you have by belonging to an organization, and it allows you to have to make more objective financial decisions. So that's how Gnosis became the first DAO with whom we worked. We became a DAO as well, and we currently also work with other organizations like Balancer Cow, ENS, and recently we've been appointed as members of Lido's Treasury Committee as well.
That's really cool. So I guess at this point, you've executed thousands of transactions. Is that fair to say on behalf of DAOs?
Yeah, over 3,500 transactions. That was 4 months ago, more or less, the last time I checked. But yeah, it's constantly growing.
Wow, that's awesome. Is there something that you could say really stands out to you as a learning that you've had that influences maybe your structure, and your setup and strategy as well after all of this time working with DAOs?
Well, yeah, there were certainly many lessons learned. Well, one thing we learned is to monitor token exposure in protocols such as Fuse, for example, to prevent, for example, pump and dump schemes. So also we have improved our DPEG and collateral ratio monitoring bots that we develop. So they provide us with early alerts in cases like, for example, there's when the USDC DPEG took place, or reach a leveraged position with a collateral ratio drops below a certain threshold, we can initiate a war room analysis of the situation and determine a course of action. So, for example, when the USDC DPEG took place, there was an emergency meeting, and we concluded that the position should be kept, that we should not sell the USDC because the peg would be recovered, because the impact like the impact that the Silicon Valley Bank had in the DPEG in Circle wasn't enough to explain the full DPEG, and eventually it would go back to normal. So that's what eventually happened. But yeah, certainly every time something an unexpected event takes place, there's a post-mortem analysis that is done by the risk management team, and then they update all the protocols that we have for the DAOs we work with, to be prepared in the future for a similar event and to be able to predict other contingencies that could take place. So, they have a decision tree with a lot of things that could go wrong and what to do in each of those scenarios. So, being more aware of risk management is also a learning experience for us, because the team has grown, as I mentioned, to prevent this kind of situations where things go south.
I guess I would imagine one of the other outcomes of some of the more recent events are some more development in your portfolio allocation strategy. And I imagine that also varies across the different DAOs you work with based on what their requirements are. So is there a specific method that you've developed basically to decide what the different portfolio allocations will be across the different DAOs that you work with?
So to allocate portfolios, like what we do, we have this strategy team. They create ad hoc strategies for each DAO, and this strategy is tailored to the portfolio composition that the DAO has and the risk appetite that the DAO has. So what they do is they analyze the portfolio, they look for investment opportunities in the DeFi space that don't require changing the composition of the portfolio. And if we apply any changes, they have to be reversible. So, for example, let's say there's ETH in the portfolio. So with the ETH, you can stake it. You get staked ETH, and with that staked ETH, you can mint DAI. But that can be reverted. You can get your DAI, which is invested in different pools, and you can get back your staked Ether, and then you can get back your Ether. So, but we do not buy other tokens in an irreversible way. I mean. So that's basically how they start working. And then there are, like, in portfolio management, there are different factors. Like the biggest factor I would say that drives the DAO investment strategy would be the risk exposure. And then you have diversification, and then you have liquidity. So those are mainly the three factors that drive the investment strategy.
That makes sense. I think it's really nice to get an insight into how you've sort of developed, I think, together with these DAOs, how they start looking at these strategies and improve on them. I think it's really interesting to see also in the context of the space developing. I'm curious if we take a step back and outside of DeFi even, how you're thinking about risk management, even of institutional level treasuries, especially as that being one of the large things that we've seen come on chain most recently. And I think it's sort of this marriage between TradFi and DeFi that has its own risks when you're working, especially with DAOs.
Yeah, I would say risk management probably is currently the most important aspect of our work. Since we began working in 2020, we have grown quite significantly in risk management. Currently, there's a matrix with all the risk parameters that are being monitored. Right now, it's got 32 parameters. And what they do, the risk management team, they draft and they maintain these emergency protocols for each DAO with which we work. And that allows us to follow like a predefined set of steps to de-risk all the positions in case of different contingencies, like different scenarios, like a sudden drop in Ether price, DPEX, hacks to protocols, etc. Because the DeFi ecosystem still hasn't ossified, and there are sudden market movements sometimes. There are constant updates of the protocols with newer versions that require to disassemble positions and put them in newer versions of the protocols. And so everything we do has to assess the risk before any actions are taken.
I guess one of the ways that you have of addressing risk is through diversification into different asset types. How have you been thinking about diversification? I guess within DeFi and especially working with these DAOs, you have special constraints there and how you're probably able to achieve diversification. So I'm curious how you're thinking about that and also with respect to Centrifuge, with respect to real world assets as well.
Yeah, so diversification is a must for treasury management. All the positions in the strategy must be dimensioned in such a way that if any of them gets compromised, they wouldn't represent a catastrophic loss for the treasury. So this principle applies to both DeFi and real world assets. Um, how the diversification takes place depends again on the risk appetite of the DAO and the results of our compliance team's due diligence on the entity which mints the real world asset-backed tokens. So, for example, if the DAO has a wrapper which has been KYC'd and is entitled to collect through, let's say, a special purpose vehicle, then that would be more secure an investment than just buying tokens in the secondary market minted by a third-party organization which hasn't been thoroughly analyzed. So each particular case needs to be, assessed. The due diligence needs to take place, and real world assets are nowadays, especially in the bear market, they are an attractive option because with a very low risk, they can provide sometimes better yields than DeFi for similar risk levels.
Do you have a strong opinion that you've developed on what percent of these portfolios should be allocated to real world assets? I guess, as you mentioned, it depends on the DAO and the risk appetite. But I'm curious if you've started seeing some sort of trend there.
Um, Not, I still haven't seen a trend in terms of how much of the treasury would be allocated to this type of funds because they are in an incipient phase in the industry. They are getting more and more attention. Our team is analyzing a few protocols that provide real world assets, and I think they are becoming increasingly attractive. As I mentioned in the bear market, the yield they can offer is higher than DeFi native alternatives with a similar risk. And I believe there's undoubtedly significant future potential for real world assets because I think eventually the boundaries between DeFi and TradFi will become more diffuse, and probably you will be able to operate through DeFi tools with any current traditional finance investment type. So probably in the future, real world assets there's a chance they will become like the preponderant option in the space, in decentralized finance, I mean.
That's awesome to hear. I think we definitely agree with that at Centrifuge for sure. I guess, I mean, looking ahead generally, How else do you think this ecosystem will evolve? I mean, both for DAO treasury management, but also maybe treasury management, generally speaking, in terms of leaning on DeFi rails a lot more for that.
Yeah, well, regarding how the space will evolve, um, in my opinion, the ecosystem will become more user friendly. That's definitely a must that we have. Um, Onboarding, a constantly growing number of users, and it will eventually be adopted by mainstream financial institutions. Certain like regulations by policymakers need to take place first. There needs to be more clarity from the legal standpoint. Um, but I think that will eventually happen, and at that moment in time, there will be like a mass adoption, and it will like leapfrog active users because I believe it will mix blockchain-based tools with traditional finance tools, and probably it'll be accessible through user interfaces with which people are acquainted already, like their home bankings, for instance, or their apps in their phones or in the websites in the computers. That's actually already happening, and it's just a matter of time, I think, until that happens, and the adoption is massive, and the rules of the game are clearly defined by policymakers of all the countries where people will, hopefully, all the countries in the world, where finance takes place. It's a global phenomenon.
That's awesome to hear. I think it's a really positive outlook for the space. And I love hearing it's just a matter of time. I think I definitely agree with that
Yeah.
sentiment. Um, I guess within that context, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges for DeFi in terms of achieving some of those things that you just mentioned?
Well, some of the biggest challenges to achieve mass adoption would be undoubtedly building bridges with the policymakers. We need to do a better job at explaining what we are doing, how the technology we use works, help them legislate in such a way that will allow DeFi to operate with clear rules, and also making DeFi at the same time more user friendly. That's uh, another side of the coin that is a must if we want to have a significant increase in the user base. So I think the opportunities lie in making financial services accessible to a vast number of people who are currently out of the system. And I believe it's got enormous potential to improve their quality of life because there are many people, a very significant percentage of people that do not have access to financial solutions. And having that access would allow them to, improve um, their purchasing power and their quality of lives for themselves, their families, their communities, and have like a virtuous circle effect.
I'd like to believe the same, that we're rebuilding these systems in a much better way to benefit more and more people.
Yeah, hopefully, fingers crossed. That's our
Yeah.
goal.
I guess within that context, you're really on the way to growing karpatkey's role within that. How do you see karpatkey within this space, and how you're going to be growing over the next years, and how you compare to maybe some of the other teams that are in this space as well?
Well, regarding Karpatki's growth, we're working to become the leaders in the treasury development space. What we are doing is constantly improving our research and our risk management capabilities. And improving our risk modeling. Being able to properly model risk is crucial for financial investment. And we are also dedicating a growing number of resources to improve automations and create tooling for trust minimized treasury management that eventually anybody will be able to use. So we would like to make these tools available to the public and allow them to hire to work jointly with us to use those tools in the best possible way to, create a strategy and invest their portfolio and create a snowball of financial resources that the DAO can rely on, to exist in the long term in a sustainable way.
I think it's yeah, it'll be exciting to see karpatkey's growth within the space. I think So also taking another step back from there, um, I'm curious how you would describe institutional sentiment generally towards this space of treasury management, but also crypto, DeFi, and real world assets as a whole.
I think institutional sentiment is increasing in all of them, in crypto, DeFi, real world assets. Um, it's becoming a trending topic in the real world because nobody wants to miss out this opportunity. Not even policymakers, because it's here to stay. It's grown. It's got a critical mass that makes it irreversible, in my opinion, at this point. So I believe it's pretty interesting and it's got a lot of potential. And we just need to have clearer rules to be able to, and some ossification, of course, because the system still hasn't matured enough to become a global mainstream option, but it's a matter of time.
There it is again. It's a matter of time.
Yeah.
I think it's a good way of looking at it. Well, I guess maybe to close this out here, one of the questions that I love asking people that we have on this show is to share one or two hot takes that you have. Um, Maybe something around either TradFi or the DeFi market or real world assets within the space. Love to hear if you have any spicy takes for us.
Any hot takes? So, well, I believe that large funds, which currently operate only in traditional finance, will eventually invest in DeFi. And as I mentioned, they will do so when there's some ossification taking place, when there's more predictability, when there's better, more robust risk modeling, which requires time. The models feed on big data, and that requires time. And once that happens, once there's more predictability, more user friendliness, then I think there will be a leapfrog, and this will be here to stay, and it will be available to everyone. And eventually, the boundaries between traditional finance and decentralized finance will be not as clearly defined as they are today, and it'll just be finance, with new tools. The same way that today we have home banking and before it didn't exist. I think in the future everybody will have their wallets, and there will be a Web3 approach to working with money, to using money.
Okay, so you heard it from Facu today. It's just a matter of time before DeFi is just finance.
Yeah, I think so.
It's an awesome take. All right, well, thank you for joining us today. It was great to have you on and hear a little bit more about yourself and Karpatkey and how the space is going to grow. I'm really excited to see your growth. And yeah, DAO Treasuries also take a big step forward too.
Thank you very much. It was great being here.